Hello, this is Corey. Hey, before we get into today's episode, I want to share something with you. I've been very fortunate and blessed to see an uptick in my coaching business over these last few months, and it's because leaders need help. So if you're one of those leaders that has found yourself kind of in a rut, the working from home is difficult, your priorities have been changed, and even questioning your purpose and kind of what are you going after, you are not alone. I put together a webinar called The Power of Priorities and Purpose. You can find it at my website, CoreyMCarlson.com. And there will be a tab on the left. Is this for you? Click on that, watch the webinar. It's about 20 minutes long. You'll learn the 5 capitals framework, which will help you with prioritization. You'll also learn a process to put together and think through a vision for your life. And so I want you to check that out as a kind of a blessing and a go forward to see if it helps get you moving. And if you want further information, then we can talk about a coaching program. But you will find absolute value in this webinar. And so I encourage you to go check it out. Thank you very much. And on to today's episode. Welcome to the Win at Home First podcast. I'm your host, Corey Carlson. This podcast is where we talk about how successful business leaders win, not only at work, but also at home. On this podcast, we'll go behind the scenes with great leaders to hear stories of how they win. Thank you for listening, and on to today's episode. Hello, today's episode is a great one with Mike, who you'll learn about more in a minute. But we talk about provision and the mental roller coaster up and down of what it's like being a business owner and providing for your family. And I enjoy this discussion because it's something that I wrestle with a lot as well. We talk about disciplines and the importance of those disciplines in our life to help drive us towards success. We also talk about the importance of life planning for your business, but also life planning for your family and your own personal life. It's a great episode. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So on to today's episode. Hello, this is Corey Carlson. You're listening to the Win at Home First podcast. I'm excited today to bring you today's guest, Mike Sudyk. He is CEO of EC Group, as well as he has his own podcast, but he's also not only winning at business, but also at home. He's married, has 4 kids, 5th one on the way. And so just a lot going on in life, but yet he is executing at all different levels. So Mike, thank you.
Hey, Corey, it's a pleasure to be on, man. I love what you're doing. I love your mission. I love your podcast, and you've had some pretty cool guests on. So I'm honored to be on.
Well, thanks. It means a lot coming from a guy who has his own podcast and so that you're listening. And so I appreciate that. And so, Mike, what are you finding to be that key trait that leaders need to have in order to win at home and at work?
If only it was that easy that you could have one trait.
Right, just one.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this in preparation for our podcast, and I love the title of your show or in your book, Win at Home First. And I think that's so important because it lays the foundation. You know, it's like putting on your oxygen mask on a plane, and it sounds cliche, but it's amazing how many leaders that I come across that I feel like don't have a good home life. And you think about that and you think, oh, that's interesting. And, you know, maybe that's what's required, but I disagree with that's what's required. But I think the thing that I would say is, you know, focusing on having your foundation solid, which is your home life, it's your faith, and that you can only go for so long with that foundation is not there. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you can put on the superhero cape and you can sprint for a little while, but if your foundation isn't there, you're not going to be able to sprint very long.
That's right. So what are you doing to shore up that foundation? At home, you said 2 things, home and faith. So hitting the faith piece, what are you doing to shore up your foundation from a faith perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that is, you know, for people of faith, you know, like myself and you as well, Corey, I know, I think that is the foundation. I think after that comes marriage, then kids and family, and then work, right? Which is easy to get those out of sync. But a couple of years ago, I think it was longer than a couple of years ago now, I actually started meeting with a guy who's a spiritual mentor of mine. He's about my dad's age, but it's interesting because I never thought about him until actually today when I was thinking about this call, and he's actually like a coach, like you would have a business coach, but he's like my spiritual coach. You know, I think Christians, we use the word like he's discipling me, But if we're talking to business leaders, which I know we are on this podcast, he's really a spiritual coach for me. And he's really my faith coach. And so we meet actually once a week. We have a standing meeting, and we don't meet every week. It's kind of, hey, if I can't meet this week, we don't try to reschedule. And we meet where he's here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So we meet in person. Sometimes we meet via Zoom. But that to me has been a huge reason for kind of where I'm at today, because it's easy to not think about your faith in that way, like you do your business, right? And he's been a great mentor for me. And really that weekly meeting helps us reset the perspective. I'll usually come into that meeting, and it's easy for us to get talking about work because he was an entrepreneur. So he's like, how's your week going? To set the frame for the meeting. And I'll be like whining about something, that's going on in the business, or trying to hire someone or something. And then to go from there to reset the perspective on like, okay, how's your walk with the Lord going, and what's going on with that? How's your marriage? And I always come out of that meeting like, not necessarily all my problems are solved, but my perspective is reset. And his famous line, this guy I studied with, he says, perspective is everything,
Right.
And he said that for years. And it's like, it's so true. It's cliche, but it's so true.
Yeah, absolutely. I know my spiritual journey significantly grew when I hired my executive coach Brandon Schaefer, who I still work with to this day. And because he would weave in scripture along the way. So even though he's my business coach and, kind of life coach, it was that spiritual coach as well. And when I got to see the Bible come alive in a business perspective, that's when it became more part of my life, if you will, because I just, like we would talk about, I need to delegate more at work. And so he'd pull out the story of Jethro telling Moses he needed to delegate. He talked about me having to do this whole development for my team. He talked about how Jesus would literally walk the disciples almost through this, equipping square of, hey, watch me do this. Now you go do it. Great. Now report back how it went. And then at the, the very end is the Great Commission, where it's like, now go.
Yeah.
And do it. And so I just got to see all these different things come in from leadership through the Bible. And it just became so much more of my life. And then fast forward to like right now where I'm at, and that's now what I'm doing with clients that are faith-based. I've got, I don't know what the percentage breakdown would be, but there's some clients I don't talk faith with. Either they aren't believers, or the company is kind of suggested don't do faith. And so I don't. But with those that are faith-based, it is weaving in that scripture. It's the things that God's talking to me about that I'm learning from in my quiet time. And so, yeah, weaving that in has been a huge help. So that's pretty cool to hear you say that as well, Mike.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think I recently formed a habit of reading a chapter of Proverbs each day for a month. It's easy to do, and there's a lot of books out there that talk about that. But it's interesting because it's like if you were to follow all these like online gurus, it's all the stuff they talk about, right? Like discipline, not chasing like fast money, like stay true to your wife. Like it's like all these core things, like all the knowledge is right here.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what God's telling us to do, but again, it's a reminder, it's a perspective. It's important to constantly be surrounded by those things. And that habit has been pretty awesome to just form. And those, like I do it first thing in the morning. So then all through the day, you're kind of like thinking about, I read that today. And that's interesting where you see it pop up, in either conversations or in the business somewhere.
Right. What are you hearing from God right now?
Really big on discipline. And it's interesting because, just the power of discipline and not chasing after too many things. Like shiny object syndrome is the buzzword, right? Which every entrepreneur is guilty of. But we just started instituting EOS in our business, which is Entrepreneur's Operating System.
Oh,
I don't know how familiar you are with that, but
I am. Yes.
Yeah. And it was just with COVID actually that we started implementing it in the business. And that's all about discipline. It's all about discipline and accountability. And it's interesting because right around that same time, I started this habit of reading Proverbs. And so I'm getting hit with discipline and accountability and all and stuff, from all angles. But I think mixed with that is what he's telling me is that I'll provide. And I actually we're going to go deep here, Corey.
Hey,
I got, Actually, it was like a few years ago. I was just kind of frustrated with the business. I felt like we should be bigger and growing, and I really felt God just saying, "Listen, I'll provide manna from heaven." And it was interesting when you think about that story in the Bible, how they tried to like store it up, right? And he's like, "No, I'm going to provide every day, and you can't store it up; it's going to rot." And I'm not to say that we shouldn't save, and it's not to oversimplify that whole notion, but I think it was more of a heart thing. Like it was kind of like God's kind of like, listen, you better have your faith in me, not your faith in Mike Sudyk to go out there and build this business. And then reading Proverbs now, it talks about, the many are the plans in the heart of man, but God knows the way, or I'm probably butchering that, but there's a central theme of, man's going to scheme for all these things and make all these grandiose plans, but at the end of the day, God's going to ordain the steps and is going to orchestrate it. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, I got to learn that lesson for the nth time,
Yeah, me too. How does that apply, that manna and storing up? What was going through your mind at that time that kind of hit you between the eyes when you heard that story? I mean, obviously, like you said, you weren't storing it up on the side. So what was the mindset or the posture that you had as a business owner that kind of you had to shake that perspective?
That's a great question. I think it was really because I didn't have a proper why. It was like I wanted the success because I kind of wanted to posture myself as I did this great thing. And a little bit that is entrenched in the fact that I took over a family business that my dad started in '99. So I've been with the company about 8 years now, and then I took the company over two and a half, almost 3 years ago. And so I think it was around that time when I took the business over that I got that word. And I think at that time I was like, I wanted to put my stamp on the business. I wanted to grow it and it to be all, oh, you see this inflection point, when you
Mike took over.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. Yeah.
That's right. I'll pat myself on the back.
Yeah.
And it was a response to that, Corey. It was like, God's kind of like, listen, I got this company this far. Yeah, your dad was great. I'm not trying to disparage my dad at all, but he's kind of like, listen, like this has been successful because I've been in it and I'm going to continue to be in it. But you need to recognize, what kind of legacy you're joining here and then what you're a part of. I keep coming back to that because it always resets my perspective. The whole manna notion, right? When you kind of get nervous about, when COVID hit, it's like we lost some business. A lot of some of the projects and things that we were going to do, end of Q1, start of Q2, they're like, oh, let's talk in Q4. Let's talk in Q1 of 21. It's kind of like, okay, you're like,
if I'm around.
Yeah, exactly. And fortunately, like we remain profitable and way better than a lot of firms, but that was kind of a check of like, okay, what perspective am I going to have here? And for us, that was a strong, let's double down on the EOS thing. Let's use this as a time to right the ship from a process perspective because we had less kind of activity going on.
Awesome.
And it's proved out well,
Yeah. Definitely a season of execution. And we will talk a lot with our clients about that season of delivery, like executing. And then there's a season of development and working on the processes. So that's really neat. You did that.
Yeah.
Back to everything we're talking about, the manna and the provision, that's a piece that I too have been wrestling with a lot. And 2020 has just been a wild year. And from the hit I took in Q2 with losing public speaking because that was all shut down. And so the impact that had, but then to close out and have 2020 be the best year ever, it's been a whirlwind from a mindset standpoint. Because of that, Mike, I haven't publicly said this, but I'm working on a mindset devotion because my quiet time has gone up this year and I've gone to a lot of different verses to help me to think through. And even one today, even this morning, was in Exodus, where God is talking to Moses about going out, and after he does the 10 Commandments, and then he does more of the kind of law of the covenant.
Yeah.
He then says, little by little, that I will drive them out.
Yeah.
And so go conquer the land, kind of around that whole Mediterranean Sea area. But little by little, that phrase jumped out at me, and I've read that before.
Yeah.
Didn't think a thing of it, and then I read it today and I was like, little by little, that's my problem, because I want big by big or enormous
Yeah.
by enormous.
Yeah.
But just to know that part of my business growing, just like yours and the situation you're talking about, is it's kind of this day by day, little by little. Because if it was a huge growth at once, it'd break us.
Yeah.
It'd break those
Absolutely.
processes that aren't set up. But it also would break our character, because then we would be too prideful, or we wouldn't be grateful, or we start to cut corners. And so that little by little, there's been a lot of these phrases throughout this past year that have kind of helped me. And this one is, I can tell, going to be one of those. It's going to be that good reminder to help me as I build the business out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in even being too future focused that you're not, implementing on the day-to-day basis. And to bring it back to winning at home, I think that is when I'm too wrapped up in like, I want to do these big things and all this stuff. It's like my mind is in that all the time, and it's not at home. It's not when I'm with my wife. It's not when I'm with my kids. And I think most people most dads especially, I think the being mentally present is the biggest struggle, right? I mean, you're running a business, like even in the good times, you're thinking about a bunch of stuff, much less a pandemic where you're trying to figure out what you're going to do to like recoup revenue. It's like, they're legitimate concerns. I mean, it's like, this is not light stuff. It's not like I'm being frivolous and I'm thinking about stupid stuff and not being mentally present with my kids. It's like, these are real stressors. And that is just that's a discipline thing. Also, to loop in the discipline, it's like, it's a discipline thing to just kind of reject those thoughts to some degree too. I mean, whether it's stress or fear, or just be thinking about things and be like, no, that's not what I need to be doing. I need to be like mentally engaged here.
Yeah.
As simple as like putting your phone away, but it's like, it's a battle of the mind. And I think you doing that mindset thing is actually really cool. That sounds like a really interesting project, because I feel like I follow some people online that talk a lot about mindset, and rightfully so, because it's a really valuable habit and thing to be mindful of and be, building that skill of a proper mindset, but not necessarily from the Christian perspective. And it's a fine line, right? It's like, if you follow these mindset gurus and they're like, you got to meditate and you got to harness your energy. I mean, I think you and I agree that can be a slippery slope. Like,
right.
If you're going to be doing that, you better be doing that grounded scripture.
That's right. No, absolutely. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Before we go back to the rest of this episode, I want to share with you my book, Win at Home First. Some of you have read it, so thank you very much. For others of you, you have not. And I encourage, if you're looking for a resource to help you with these times of your work is now in your home and your home is now in your work, and what this looks like, this book is being helpful to many leaders like you. Forbes magazine said it was one of 7 books everyone on your team should read. And the book is broken up into 4 different sections to help you. First is about you, understand who you are. The second is marriage and ideas and tips to help with your marriage. Third is parenting. And the last is work. So these 4 different sections to help you recalibrate during this time and to help move forward. So if you are needing additional resources, I encourage you to check out my book, Win at Home First. It is available on Amazon as well as Audible. And so on to the rest of the episode. Thank you very much. So you talk about the disciplines. I love that word that you brought on the beginning. You talk about disciplines at home. Mike, what does disciplines at home look like for you? Because you mentioned EOS. I assume the little bit I know of you, but I've enjoyed the different conversations we've had. You're the visionary.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Your wheels are always turning. What's next? What's next? So how are you at home putting up those boundaries? So it's like, hey, I'm going to be intentional with my wife now. I'm going to be intentional with all 4 of my kids, or one of these 4 kids.
Yeah.
How are you doing that?
I'll start out by telling you that we're not that great at prioritizing date night, my wife and I. We go in fits and spurts with that, but we have 4, soon to be 5 kids that are all going to be under 10 years old. So it's a little bit of a busy time. I don't mean to say that as an excuse, but other than that, I would say that if I had to say one thing, you said boundaries, and we intentionally limit the things that we are tied into from a scheduling standpoint.
awesome.
Obviously COVID helped with that, but
Yeah.
we just don't fill up our schedule. And it's
So you were
interesting.
good about that going into
Yeah.
the pandemic.
Yeah. It's like
Cool.
we just don't commit to a lot of things. And I don't know. I feel like people overcommit even to good things. And then you miss out at, like, you always have to be going. And I think for an entrepreneur, for a visionary like myself, I would skew more that way. I would attribute it to my wife, that she sets the tone in terms of like saying no to some things, because I'm classically want to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's decision. I mean, we've had these discussions, like her and I. It's like we want to consciously prioritize our family time, and sometimes that means not really doing anything. We're just going to be playing with the Hot Wheels cars with my 2-year-old, and he loves it. It's like spend like 30 engaged minutes with him. It's like, that's so fulfilling. Like, that's like, talk about a mind reset. Like, it sounds like silly, but I would say that has been a huge, and you see it when you talk to people and they're like, oh, I got to run to this. I got to run to this. we got all this stuff scheduled. And I'm sure as our kids get older, they're going to get involved in more things and that sort of thing. But that's been a huge part of our success, I would say, in the rhythms, when you talk about the rhythms.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you're sucked into rhythms that are not healthy for your family, with your obligations and that sort of thing.
So I love how you said playing, the cars but intentional. And so that means your phone's away. I mean, 20 minutes of no phone in the hand with a kid is so much more valuable than 2 hours of phone in hand and yes, kid, whatever.
Yeah.
And then moving the cars around on the floor. Yep, I get it. So it's about being present where you're present.
Yeah.
Just completely dialed in. That's cool. What do your rhythms look like from a day standpoint? Like kind of waking up, and are you getting after it from a journaling and scripture standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. Scripture first thing for me, and scripture and prayer is what I strive to do. That's just like, that's my like biggest like non-negotiable thing that I try to stay on. So it's like, I actually read a lot of scripture on my phone, which is, I've got a habit of, which is not always healthy, right? Because I have the Bible app and I'm highlighting and putting all this stuff on. So I always, like, if I'm picking up my phone, it's like I'm looking at scripture first thing. And so that's one of the biggest rhythms. I'm kind of hit or miss with journaling. And it's one of the things I wish I was better at, or just did more regularly. But what I found is I'm very much a verbal processor when I have something on my mind. And that's also been a discipline I've been trying to build with my wife, is sharing with her. It's kind of a form of journaling, because you're trying to get the thoughts out of your head in a way that's constructive and not me just dumping, things onto her. And I think that's a skill that you kind of have to, it's like, I don't want to just sit there and be like, here's all the crap I'm dealing with at work, let me tell you about it. I don't think that's wise. But if the opposite of that, if I'm very not communicative to her about what I'm going through, then it ultimately blows up later, right? And it blows up in the way of, we get in a fight that's not about that thing, and it's it's because I'm stressed about something that I haven't told her about. She's stressed about something at home that she's not telling me about, and it's like, and all of a sudden we're mad at each other, and it's like, we know it's not because of this thing, but we're not sure what it is. It's like, not that you have any experience with that, right, Corey? Or your clients. So that's a real thing I've been trying to work on, and we've been married 10 years, a little over 10 years. And it's like, still learning how to do that,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for my wife and I, we've been married 21 years, but there just continues to be these other breakthroughs that take place. And, breakthrough I've talked about here, it feels like a lot lately, maybe just more with clients, is as I just use the Enneagram more with individuals. But that was a breakthrough. And it all comes down to communication. The way I would communicate to her was not necessarily, and I'm not talking about love languages, I'm talking about even other stuff too. And the way I communicate would be different than how she wanted to be communicated with. And then her communicating back to me in the way she'd ask all these different questions. And sometimes I'm just about results and not relationship. She's about, kind of protection and being loyal, but trying to figure the different pieces out. And now that I understand that, we've had breakthrough, because I understand, how she is perceiving the situation. And then now she also has more grace for me, because she sees how I kind of view the situation.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to that communication. That's been so helpful.
Did that come as a result of like, how did that come about, that kind of breakthrough? I'm curious about like that, the trend of like, okay, was it manifesting itself in multiple areas of your life? And then you're like, boom, like I saw this in my marriage, or how did that come about? Curious.
Yeah, I learned of the Enneagram specifically, since we're talking about that. The Enneagram specifically, I learned more about that of myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at these blind spots I had.
Yeah.
And I've done DISC, I'm DISC certified, I've done Myers-Briggs. I mean, I'm familiar with them all, but there's something about the Enneagram that talked to me, probably because it's simpler, meaning Myers-Briggs is whatever it is, 32 different combinations, and Enneagram's just 9.
Yeah.
Like I'm not, maybe I'm not smart enough to know all 32, but I can handle 9. Anyways, in that I saw those shadow sides I had and saw some unique wiring. And then I was like, so I had Holly take it. And so Holly took it, and same thing. It worked both ways. So it just helped us through there. One other phrase that was very helpful for us, a mentor told me, is don't hear what I'm not saying.
Mm.
And there's a lot of times in our own life where, I may say something, but Holly hears something else just because maybe it's my body language, but maybe it's a guilt or an insecurity she's got, and then things would blow up.
Yeah.
I remember one time, I always go back to this one story where I got up early. I was at the dining room table. I was writing, and Holly wakes up, and it had snowed, and she came down, said hi, and did you shovel? That was it. It was innocent. It was just, did you shovel? And I had before she said that, I had all this guilt of like, I probably should have shoveled. And she's asking because now she thinks I've been worthless and just sitting here playing on my computer. And she's going to have to go shovel because I didn't do it. Like, I had all this crap going through my head, all because I heard what she did not say. Like, she did not say, hey, lazy turd on the computer. She did not say, you're always worthless, I always have to go shovel. She didn't say that, but I heard a lot of those things. All she said is, did you shovel? So I think a big win at home first part of this conversation is don't hear what I'm not saying, right?
That's huge, man. I love that story. I could totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Happened more times I'd like to count.
Yep, absolutely. So what are you most excited about here in the next few months, Mike?
Well, we're having a baby in February.
That's
so
right.
I'm pretty
number
excited
5.
about that. Yeah, number 5. So it's gonna be a whole new level. I'm excited about that. We actually had some. We've been doing this week annual planning in the business, and feeling really optimistic about going in. Because we didn't have a full year behind us with EOS, so we're kind of entering our first full year with a EOS perspective. And
you got your 3 big rocks you're going after.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it just feels refreshing because we've done annual planning in the past, but then year after year, you kind of like don't achieve things and you don't address certain issues. So you go into it with a sense of cynicism. And so one of the big things with EOS is like issue resolution. So identify, discuss, and solve, is a whole process they do.
Right.
And I feel like we're addressing things. We're addressing elephants in the room. We're going into it with kind of eyes wide open. And so I'm feeling optimistic about that. And so my wife and I have been talking, about EOS as we've gone through that journey in the business and how we can kind of institute that at home to some degree.
Awesome.
And so we've been kind of sorting that out and discussing that. We haven't had designated time to do that, but I think we will. I'm going to be taking some time off here. So we'll spend that kind of planning 2021 and what does it mean for our family and doing some of that like 10-year visioning. It's one of the things that my dad actually told me when I 2 pieces of marriage advice that my dad gave me were, 1, you marry the family. And I didn't fully appreciate that till I've been married a couple of years.
Yeah.
But I tell all, people that are in the process of getting married or hope to get married one day, that a piece of advice. The second is he advised us to, when we got married, to draw out like a life plan. And the life plan it's never going to go the exact same to this life plan that at the beginning of your marriage, but it sets the proper perspective and gives you a longer term perspective to think about, okay, when would we want to have kids? What are we thinking about for jobs? Where do we want to live? What are trips you'd want to take? And when would you do that? And you identify kind of the seasons of life. And my wife and I kind of did that just the other day. And we're thinking, in another 10 years of marriage, you think about 10 years is what EOS does. They talk about 10-year, goals and vision. It's like our youngest will be 10 and our oldest will be 19. We're like, wow, so you just kind of map that out with their ages and where it would be doing. And it really set the tone for the next 10 years of, hey, what things we would want to do with them, maybe what trips we want to take and that sort of thing. And, yeah, I'm just excited about that. I'm excited to dig more with her into that and kind of setting that 10-year vision for our family.
Man, I love that. A few things you mentioned. I hear your excitement. I really, really do. And I can get excited about it. But I know there's some listeners saying, well, my wife's probably not going to be very excited about the whiteboard. My wife's not going to be excited about it. And that's how it is in my house. It does take a little convincing of, hey, let's do this. And Mike, in your house, are you both excited and fighting over the marker for the whiteboard and laying it all out? Or is it a little bit of, you're pushing the lead and then she says, all right, let's go.
My wife is probably more on the side of the whiteboard lover than most, I would say. She's very process oriented and she's very much an integrator of my visionary, to talk in EOS terms. But I would say it kind of goes back to what you're saying of like the Enneagram, like knowing how to communicate. It's like I am classically bad at being a visionary and just being like, we're going to do this. I do a lot of home renovation projects, and so I'll just jump into them without talking to my wife. And that always gets me into trouble because I have this vision for how it's going to work. And it's like, if I just slowed down for a second and identified what is it about this project she's going to like and what's a plan, that goes way better. It's like, duh, Mike, it's like, but I mean, when you talk about that, if your wife doesn't gravitate towards that or whatever, it's just partly like slowing down and being like, okay, I'm real excited about this. Okay, how do I craft this message in a way that I can communicate what my heart is to her? And then we can have a discussion about it. Because if you don't, then she shuts you down right away, because you're saying it in a way that's kind of going to turn her off, Yeah. It's not like you got to like say, we're going to change the plan to what you have. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying like, you just got to prevent the shutdown,
Absolutely. And they also just want to know that we value their opinion. Like, come along for the ride. I mean, I remember I do such a, I try to do this well now, but my wife will always let me go do something if I want. Mm-hmm. I'm always, I tell my kids not to use the word always, but most of the time she always will say yes. Like if I need to go to a happy hour or networking or any of those things, the answer is always going to be yes.
Yeah.
But what I've learned is if I ask her to go or like invite her into the decision, it's such a different delivery of we're in this together. Like, hey, hon, networking opportunities coming up on Thursday night. Is it okay if I go and I know it's a little heavier lifting for you and the kids and get them to and from practice? Is that all right? It's so much different than I have a networking event on Thursday. Good luck with everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
But I found that to be so helpful in that communication piece. If I got to do a project, like you said, a house project, or maybe I got to work on a work project, as you do at different times too. It's like if I just give the heads up and hey, I want to do this Saturday morning. Does that work, or should I do Saturday afternoon? Something like that. It just, it's such a big difference.
Yeah,
communicating up front so that they know that they've got a buy-in, right? We talk about that at work. In order to get buy-in, we got to make sure they got a voice in. And so at home, I need to make sure my family's got a voice in order to get their buy-in as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also liked your EOS whole discussion about work and then taking that into home. Part of what I talk about at Went Home First is, and I'm not the first person to ever say this, but it's this idea we do all this planning and everything for work, and then we just wing it at home.
Yeah,
like there's vision and values and 3 and 5 year, 10-year plans, but at home it's just like, I don't know, let's figure it out.
Yeah.
And so in the book I talk about, for anyone listening who's not read the book, is I believe a vision and values are important for a family. So listed out a framework to create a personal and family vision, as well as, values for the family. So it's, called the 5 Bs. And so it's a neat process to go through. But for us, that was a big thing. And as I was joking with you, Mike, earlier about, is your wife excited about doing it? When I rolled out the vision values, it was, I've learned it's a drip and not a fire hose in my house. I used to come and say, we're doing this. And now it's like just a little bit at a time, but we get there and it's awesome.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That we crafted like vision core values. And I was like thinking about it, and we're doing all the stuff with EOS. And I'm like, I got to talk to my wife about this. And I'm like, okay, just back up the truck a little bit. Let's figure this out. let's have a couple conversations. Let's not be like, I got it all crafted, boom, because that's not what it's about either. Even in a business setting, it's about like, it's discussions. It's like, hey, how are we already operating? What are the things that we're already kind of doing that we identify and can do better? It's not this fire hose, and that's really important. That's cool.
Before we wrap up, I want you to give a plug for your own podcast and why you did it, and just it's a resource for fathers to go to. So do you share about your podcast and what's behind it?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying, I took over I joined the family business 8-9 years ago, and then took it over about 3 years ago. And that we do software development. And so I was already in the tech space, and I didn't see any leaders talking about, and this is right around, we had really young kids. So I was like, hey, I want to be a good dad and I want to run this business really well. How do I balance this? And I saw a bunch of guys, especially in tech, talking about how to scale businesses, how to scale a startup, but no one's talking about doing that in context of being a dad. We're talking to a buddy of mine about this, and he's like, just find some dads that are in tech and just interview them on a podcast. And I was like, okay. And I just did that. That was like 5 years ago. And so I would just get these guys on and say, how do you do this? And what do you do? And tell me about your stories. What are your tips? What are your tricks? And it's been awesome. I met some really cool people, and I really it's been almost just a selfish thing that I did this, was because I just wanted to know. I wanted to have these relationships with these guys, and it's been awesome. So if you go to 2centdad, the number 2centdad.com, you can find it there. We're on Apple Podcasts and everything. And yeah, it's been a cool journey. It's cool to connect with people, to hear their insights and all that. So.
Yep. I agree. And I think it's cool you did it, and you've been doing it for a while, and launching a podcast is one of those things I think many listeners can hear and maybe can't relate exactly to, but it's something I thought about for a while, and I just didn't necessarily have the guts to do it. And I wish I would have done it sooner. Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's probably for any listener, whatever you're thinking, I need to do this, man, go and do it, whatever that is, because you're going to get 6 months in or a year in and be like, man, I wish I would have done this sooner. And the podcast, for me, just like you mentioned, I love it. I wish I would have done it sooner. So overcome that fear and push through to whoever it needs that nudge today.
Yeah.
Mike, this has been awesome. How can listeners get a hold of you just to learn more about you, what you're doing, EC Group? Obviously, you told us about the podcast.
Yeah, you can check me out at 2centdad.com or at Sudyk, SUDYK is pretty much what I'm at on like Twitter or anything like that. Look me up on LinkedIn. Happy to reach out. Thank you so much, Corey, for having me on your podcast. I love what you're doing, man. I love your show. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I haven't read the book yet, but just the mission, I think, and the message needs to be broadcast by more and more people. I think it's a very important message. So,
yeah. Hey, as we said at the very beginning, little by little,
that's right.
We're going to get it out there, right? Both of our messages. So very cool, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I want to thank you for listening to my podcast, Win at Home First. I am so grateful to hear from listeners like you that this content has been helpful. So now I would love for you to pay it forward. I want to get this message in the hands of more listeners. We need leaders to be winning both at home and at work, especially during this time. So please take a minute to share this episode with somebody you think would find value in it, as well as rate and subscribe. As a thank you, please visit my website at CoreyMCarlson.com to download a free resource that people are finding value in. Thank you very much.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.